I'm Phoebe Dre, the Cashflow Pocket Rocket, and I'm so excited today to bring you this video. It is the replay of my April meetup where I had the amazing Dr. Ursula Stroh share her incredible story of resilience and how she works with companies and people to go through change management and strategies that they can implement to make sure that the process is as smooth as possible and they can come out the other side stronger and more resilient. Now, Ursula shared her personal story of how she herself went through many changes and how she personally coped with it and what she did. And it's probably a little bit different from what you expected. So make sure you watch the video. Her story is absolutely incredible. And if you have ever felt like having an amazing adventure yourself, you absolutely must watch this video. Dr. Ursula Stroh leapt into the unknown and sailed around the world in a race. She had never sailed before. She'd never been on a sailing ship in this type of environment before, and it was all absolutely new to her. So if you've ever had the calling to do something absolutely outrageous that your friends and family think you're absolutely crazy for even thinking about it, then this video is 100% for you. Enjoy. I absolutely loved the interview and the presentation that Ursula shared. So I hope you do too. Please send me an email and let me know what you think of it. And just to let you know, I'm hosting in-person meetup events from now on the first Wednesday of every month here on the Gold Coast, my hometown, in Surfers Paradise. Actually is the first one at Ohana's Restaurant Cafe in Surfers Paradise. So if you love in-person events and you love connecting with other like-minded business owners, then make sure that you check out my meetup, Ambitious Biz Owners Gold Coast, for all the details of all my events in the future. I am Phoebe Dre, the Cashflow Pocket Rocket, and I'm so excited to bring you Dr. Ursula Stroh's amazing story here today. Enjoy.
Thank you again so much for inviting me along. And what I would love to share with you today is my experience of how I dealt with changes that happened in my life. And actually, Emma, in a way, I was listening to you talking about a breakdown, and I think that it was actually from a breakdown from a lot of changes that happened at the same time in my life that I started on this big journey of mine. So I'd love to share with you how I coped with it, and then also just on some tips of how I can share maybe some of the learnings with people and how they are going through change. So the most impactful changes people say are the death of a spouse or a child. Divorce is also a big one. Separation from a partner and then being detained or imprisoned. The death of a family member, and then a major illness or injury, like, for example, a big operation or surgery that you've had. Dismissal from work, even getting married is a big one. But then there's also things like, for example, when you've moved, that's a big change for people and something that they really battle to go through as well. And many others don't even realize that these things could also be major effects on your life. Like, for example, the pandemic and the isolation that we went through. That was a major change for all of us that suddenly just happened to us. And I don't think we even know what the impact of all of that is on our lives. And you can even look at positive things and those changes that they cause. So, for example, I belong to a group called the Camino de Santiago, and people who walk that, and they come back after walking those trails and they find that they go through severe depression just sitting in front of a screen. And when I went sailing around the world, when I came back, it was amazing to me sitting in front of a screen and thinking, oh my gosh, a year ago I was sitting on the side of a boat looking over the sea, and the whole meaning of life changed for me. And even you find that sometimes you get Olympians that get to the height of their careers and then stop, and suddenly there's just nothing. And they very often, there's many stories of Olympians that have become alcoholics or become addicted because they just can't cope with the changes after that big spike in their careers, and then there's just nothing. So that's a very interesting way of looking at how people deal with those kinds of changes in their life. But to tell you a little bit more about this and how I specifically coped, is I wanted to start with the story. So I completed my PhD in 2004, and I had external examiners in the USA, and they then offered me a job after that to go and teach at Maryland University in the top school in my field. And I took the role on, and my husband stayed behind in Australia. Well, he was supposed to come with me, but about 2 months before he was supposed to come, he decided that he wanted to complete his study. So he stayed behind, and we had a kind of a Skype relationship, and spoke every day on Skype. So before I went overseas, typical of those types of jobs as well, I studied for my PhD for about 7 years, and I was just in the books and really putting everything into it. And when I came there as well and started teaching, it was this situation of where I didn't want to be outed as an imposter, and typical imposter syndrome was very, very strong in me. And I worked myself to absolute exhaustion every day, late hours and weekends. When my husband went paragliding or cycling or camping or whatever, I studied and I did my research papers, and I was preparing lectures and preparing reports and whatever. I never went with them. And when I was in Maryland all alone, that's basically what I did. I just worked all day. And one day my husband called me and he said he had bad news for me, and he knew that I really liked Steve Irwin. So he told me that he had died, and it was really upsetting to me. I mean, I was in absolute tears, and I asked him what had happened, and he said, well, he died while he was working with stingrays. So I started crying, and I thought about it a bit, and I said, well, actually, that makes me feel a little bit better. And he was a bit surprised at my change of emotion, and he said, what does that really mean? I mean, does that mean if I suddenly die from a paragliding accident that you won't be upset? And I said, yes, of course I would be sad, but I wouldn't be as upset as when you die in a car accident or cancer or something like that, because you've done something that you really feel passionate about while that happens. So it makes me just a little bit better. And he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, so Cooks, how are you going to die one day? Are you going to die from a book against your head or something? And I was like, wow, is that how he sees me? Is that how I'm represented to the world? And I thought, wow, that's a pretty boring life, and a boring way to die anyway, but a boring life. Is that really my passion in life? Is just books all the time? And it really made me think. It made me incredibly sad about myself as well. I'd worked so hard to get where I was, and I thought, for what? What legacy am I leaving? What kind of life am I living? And that really haunted me and stayed with me for a long, long time. Anyway, I'll come back to the story, but eventually we got divorced, which wasn't something that I wanted or planned for myself. And it had a really big effect on me. And I was actually quite devastated by it. Together with that, at that moment in time in my life, my dad had cancer. I worked for the CEO of IBM as his communication manager, and I worked weekends. I worked all the time. I was absolutely exhausted, and everything was just really stressful. And I think I had a breakdown at that point. And I went into complete depression, and I'm talking seriously suicidal almost. I was really not in a good space. And then one day I saw this, and I put this on Facebook, and it said, you can break down a woman temporarily, but a real woman will always pick up the pieces, rebuild herself, and come back stronger than ever. This really talked to me, and I started thinking, how can I rebuild myself from being so completely lonely, being so completely broken? I just wasn't in a good place at all, but I felt I needed to do something completely different and out of my comfort zone. I needed to have a circuit breaker. So one day on the train to work, I saw this. I was in the middle of a busy train. This was in the station at Waverton, and there were people standing all around me. I was in this enclosed space, and I was absolutely stressed. And this came up, and I immediately raced into the office and I signed up. This was such a weird thing for me to do. I mean, I have never sailed before, never. I've probably been on a sailing boat 3 times in my life before that. I had no money. This was a very, very expensive race to do. I had no money at that point. I just decided this is what I'm going to do. I was probably foolishly ignorant when I signed up to do this. And it was a few months before my 50th birthday. It wasn't as if I was the youngest person to take on something so completely different and out of my comfort zone. But I just wanted the hurt to go away. I just wanted to change my world completely. And this is what I chose to do. So I took up 3 part-time jobs. I sold everything of value to me, like my car. I put everything in storage. My broker helped me to mortgage myself up to the hilt. I took a voluntary redundancy to help me pay for this. And I decided this is what I was going to do. But it was probably financially the worst thing I could ever have done. But I just decided this is it. So let's fast forward a year later. This is what I decided to do. So this is me in the beginning, at the start of the race. I was really clumsy on the boat. I was completely stupid when it came to boats. I couldn't speak boat. It was like a whole new language for me. It was something that I didn't think I would ever be able to do, but I just decided I was going to master it. I was probably a bit dangerous as well in the way that I handled the ropes and the lines and everything, but I learned, and I was so determined to be a good sailor. I tried so incredibly hard, and it was really, really hard. We were only 4 women on a boat of 20 other crew, of 20 crew. So we were 20 crew altogether. We were 4 women. The rest were all men, and we weren't treated any differently to the guys. So we really had to pull our weight and just see it through. Now, the night before we left, before we sailed out from London, in the Grange Tower Hotel, was the last night, 1 September 2013, I wrote myself a little note, and I left it in a bag, and it could only be accessed if I were to return safely after a year at sea. And in that little box, I took a little box, I put the note in there, and I put a little anchor charm in there to represent my return back to terra firma after the circumnavigation. And I remember how scared I was. I was terrified. I can remember how vulnerable I felt and how big this experience felt to me that was lying ahead of me. But I decided that's it. And this was a little poem that I wrote to myself that night. Life is a circle, and I'm starting this one again. I can just mention this was my 2nd divorce. So I kind of felt, gosh, what am I doing with my life? Anyway, I'm starting this one again. On a creaking boat with holes and watery bilges, but large, proud sails, and a big bummed, hard-chimed hull. Lazy her lulls and tardy her doldrums, while she revels in storms and wild, windy waves that angles her body and pounds her bow. Who will I meet when I say my name out loud? Who will I face when I see my scarred reflection? The person walking towards me at the exact same place she started the circumnavigation will be a woman with no doubt of whom she's become, and there will be change. Sunburnt eyes, sky blue weathered, but warrior brave through a fearless smile, a quiet calm with confidence and acceptance of what life has dished out, embracing the moment right here, right now. I can't wait to meet her. And I think maybe you pick up that there was fear there. There was definite fear, but there was also an interest in what this experience would do to me for a year at sea. So just to connect back to my little story of how I will die one day, the Southern Ocean was probably one of the most remote and scariest places I've ever experienced. It was freezing, freezing cold, and the wildest of weather. We had absolutely severe hurricanes that we just went through them. We couldn't go around them because you were on a race. You were racing 11 other boats and you just wanted to get to the end point. So you just had to push through and go through whatever came your way, much like life. We had the one specific hurricane, we had over 150 knots of wind and seas that I would never ever forget in my life. The noise of the wind was absolutely overwhelming, and this rain was coming horizontally in big drops into your face and your eyes. And in the middle of one of these storms in the Southern Ocean, I was on watch on deck with we were just 4 of us on deck, and we were huddled together to try and just keep warm, but also just probably to not to be too scared, and to just watching this drama that was unfolding around us. And then at some point, the helmsman said that we have to go and take the jib down and put the storm sail up. Now, this was kind of still in the beginning of the race, but it was the storm, and the beginning of the storm coming our way. but we had to go and do that. So if you can imagine that this was the moment that was absolutely horrifying, but was also even before we went into the worst of the storm. But anyway, we were tethered on from our jackets, our life jackets, and we had to get to the front of the boat. It took us about a half an hour to get just to the front of the boat. And while you were tethered on, the boat went through the waves. Now the wave would come and you'd go through it and it would go over the boat and then you go up. And when you went under, when the water came over the bow of the boat, you went underwater and the tether kept you attached to the boat, and you would lift from the boat as the water kind of pushed you up. And then as you got out of the wave again, it slammed you down on deck again. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is it. This is how I'm going to die. Because every time we went under, I was struggling to breathe, but you were held on. You couldn't get to the top of the wave to get a breath. And then it slammed you down and then you took your breath and then you just watched the next wave come. And I was absolutely terrified. And I thought to myself, this is how I'm going to die. This is me. This is the moment in the middle of the Southern Ocean. And I can't tell you the feeling at that moment. But suddenly that story of Steve Irwin, the conversation that I had, came up. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is not a book against my head. This is in the middle of the most incredible storm, in the most incredible place on earth, with on a boat. And I thought, what a wonderful way to die, if this is the way that I'm dying. And suddenly this storm became the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. The air was crisp and the sea was ferociously blue, and the drama around me was suddenly absolutely exhilarating and the best adrenaline rush that I've ever had. And it absolutely turned me into fascination and awe for what was going on around me, because I just had that sudden switch from fear to, wow, actually, this is amazing. So I just want to give you a bit of a taste of what that actually looks like. And I don't know if you'll be able to hear anything. You might not, so I'll just give you a bit of a running commentary on how we're going. So this is what it looked like, more or less. I'm just going to see if full screen will work here. So this is more or less what it looked like. Waves that were probably 2-3 stories high. And you just absolutely had to try and trust in the boat that it would get you through. It was every time when I had to go on deck and you zipped up your safety jacket and your weather gear, I was terrified every time. Still now, even on a boat, when I slip the lines, I'm scared. And we had to work really, really hard. There was a helmsman trying to just keep the boat up. Imagine this is the angle that you had 16 crew down below that were trying to cook and clean and sleep, and at that angle. But I just want you to see the absolute exhilaration of the people also as we were going through all of this. So this just gives you an idea of the foaminess of the waves, the movement, the effort we had to put in. And every time when a wave came over, it was like this rush of water that filled your boots, and it felt as if the water went right to the core of your bones. So yeah, just a bit of an idea of that absolute feeling of. This was also just to give you an idea of how the boat went underwater. But I'd love you to just watch this guy's face after you've been totally drenched. And I'll never forget that. That was something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. That feeling of absolute exhilaration. So my message is, when you stand in the storm and the wind doesn't blow your way, you have to adjust the sails. What does that actually then mean? This was me at the end of the race when I finished. 10 of us went right around the world, and so much happened in that year. It was an absolute lifetime. My dad died while we were at sea. My dog died. It was an amazing experience. It was like 5 lives that I've lived in that year. But also a feeling of absolute achievement when I got to the other side. This was, I wanted to share this with you because, as I told you, I left this little box for myself in London. I took with me around the world 3 little charms. One was the little sailing boat to help me through the sailing experience. My little cat, the little cat charm was to kind of just take my little cat on the journey. He got lost when we left, and we never saw him again. My dog, I had to give my dog to somebody to look after, and her name was Kelka. She was my little star, so that was the star charm. But then the anchor charm that I collected, and then I wrote myself this little note, and the note is in Afrikaans, my home language, but translated it says, "Be very, very proud. Congratulations. You are incredible and you deserve only the best that life has to offer. If you are reading this, you should know you can do anything." And still now, even while I'm reading this, it brings absolute emotions up in me of just realizing that I was brave enough to do this. I still can't believe that I actually saw this race through for a year, because it was something that wasn't natural to me to sail. It was such a foreign experience, but it was such an incredible experience to finish the race and know that I was able to do this. So just again, sometimes we face these things and we take on these challenges, and it set me on a path of constant change. Things I've instigated actually for myself. I still do that. When I get comfortable, I change something, and usually something big. I move or I take on something completely new. And these changes also constantly happen to me. But you know what? It's also something that's in our lives at the moment. As we get older, and also the world around us, and so many things are happening to us, so many things like deaths and divorces and menopause for some of us, and children leaving home, or children being born, or so many changes in our lives, and it's constant. And you can even think about the experiences that we've had in the last 2 years with the fires and the floods and the pandemic, and at the moment, the war in Ukraine, and what people have to go through. These are all changes that are constantly happening to us. It's not something that we can say, oh, when things change, I'll adjust. It is becoming a constant in our lives. But they also open a lot of doors, and they create opportunities that we would never have had before. So for example, I sailed, after I did this race, I sailed and for another year, crazy financially again, but I sailed for another year from Tahiti to Sydney through the South Pacific with a man I met while I was on the Clipper race. It was an absolute highlight of my life so far. I always say there'll be more, I'm sure. But remarkably, I think going through those changes has taught me to be a stronger person. I think it's also helped me through the isolation of the pandemic. I was completely on my own. And we made it through. I mean, we all made it through the pandemic. We all made it through, and still struggling with the aftermath. I have COVID at the moment. So I think it's just, it gives us these types of experience, gives us the strength to carry on, and it teaches us the lessons of going through change. So my last message to you, my last slide, is just strong people are people who don't feel sorry for themselves. They take control of their lives. They're ready to accept changes. When a change happens, they accept that this is just life, and they accept the change. And they also accept that failures, and Phoebe, we spoke about it just earlier, and failures, and talking about failures that we might have experienced, but those are the things that make us stronger. One of the things that I battle with is to leave the past behind. I attach very much to people and places. So for me, detachment is a very hard thing, especially when I've really learned to love a person or love a place, or it's really hard for me to detach. But if you really want to be strong and move forward, you have to leave those things behind. Also take calculated risks. So don't be too risky, don't be too stupid in what you do, but take on risks. Appreciate time alone. And one of the things that I talk a lot to my clients about is how to be strong in aloneness, so that it doesn't become loneliness. And it's very much, there is strength in being alone. And then also develop realistic expectations about life, because life is shit. And we just have to accept that those things will happen to us. So, sorry, I said it was my last slide, but almost finished. Learn resilience. Learn what makes you stronger when big changes happen to you. It's really important, and it's one of the courses also that I teach master classes to my clients is resilience training. And it's difficult. I mean, fear is difficult. Every time when I went on a new race on that boat, I was absolutely terrified, and I still am. But it did make me stronger. So there's a few people out there that know that I wasn't always so strong, and I'm sorry about that. But that is also realistic to say, yeah, sometimes I am going to be scared, but how do we build resilience to take on that fear? And it's a mindset to take on these changes. So it's not what happens to us, but how we react that matters. And that's a big lesson for us also. And think about that guy in the smile after that wave hit him. And I love that moment where he just turns around and smiles. And we often had an absolute laugh, even though you were drenched, totally drenched. And then the last point there, rely on your own inner strength. It's bloody lonely to do change. And it's the most alone you'll ever feel when you go through these big changes. But strength in alonement is a very empowering feeling. And I talk a lot to older women about traveling on their own, and the confidence that actually gives you when you're willing to put yourself through that. So just to end off, and I love this because it has one of my favorite photos of the race on this. And we were in the North Pacific, and a school of dolphins came to the bow of the boat, and it was just the most peaceful, beautiful moment. It was towards the end of the race. And I remember that moment. I'll always remember that. So these are the things that come to you when you're willing to take on these changes. So 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. Thanks, Phoebe.